The morning of May 17, 1968, began like any other for Wilbur Riddle, a 29-year-old water well driller from rural Kentucky. The sun was rising slowly, casting a pale orange glow across the misty hills that surrounded U.S. Route 25. Back then, this highway wasn't anything special, just a quiet rural road where cars passed occasionally, where the sound of engines faded quickly into the silence of the trees. Wilbur had a small routine before work. He liked to walk along the wooded edges near the highway looking for discarded glass bottles. People threw them out of car windows, and he collected them for a little extra money. It wasn't glamorous, but in the late 60s, every extra dollar counted. And Wilbur was the kind of man who didn't mind the quiet. He enjoyed the stillness, the fresh morning air, and the sense that nothing bad ever really happened in these parts. But he was wrong. On this particular morning, something caught his eye, something out of place, something that didn't belong among the leaves, branches, and tall Kentucky grass. At first, it looked like a rolled-up tarp, maybe a discarded piece of camping gear. But the more he stared at it, the more uneasy he felt. It wasn't lying naturally. It looked placed. Almost hidden. The object was wrapped in a green canvas, the kind used for old tent covers. The fabric was worn, dirty, and tightly bound. It lay near a ditch, half covered by branches as if someone had tried to camouflage it, hoping no one would ever notice. Wilbur took a few hesitant steps closer. Something about the shape made his stomach churn. It wasn't the shape of equipment. It wasn't trash. It seemed too firm, too heavy, too stiff. He paused, wondering if he should just walk away. Maybe it wasn't his business. Maybe it was something he didn't want to get mixed up in. But curiosity, and a strange, creeping sense of dread, pulled him in. As he crouched next to the canvas bundle, an unmistakable smell rose in the air. A smell so sharp, so foul, so impossible to ignore. The smell of something dead. Wilbur stepped back in shock, covering his mouth. He had lived in the country long enough to know the scent of animal decay, but this was different. This was stronger. Human. His heart pounded as he reached down and loosened one corner of the canvas. Just a little. Just enough to understand what he was dealing with. When the fabric shifted, he froze. Inside was a girl. A young woman. Her skin pale and lifeless, her hair dark and matted. Her body curled unnaturally, as if squeezed into the canvas to make it smaller. To make it easier to hide. Wilbur stumbled backward, his hands trembling violently. He had never seen a dead person before, not like this, not in such a cruel and deliberate pose. Whoever this girl was, someone had tried to erase her. Someone had wrapped her up like an object, not a human being. He ran down the road to the nearest place with a phone, a small gas station. Breathless and shaking, he called the police. Minutes later, patrol cars rolled up, their red lights flashing against the trees. Officers approached the scene carefully. The quiet highway turned into a crime scene, and the peaceful Kentucky morning transformed into something dark, heavy, and unforgettable. Detectives opened the canvas fully. What they found was heartbreaking. A girl. A teenager or young adult, maybe 16 to 19 years old. No ID. No purse. No jewelry. Nothing that could help. Her clothing was simple, and her injuries suggested violence. The advanced decomposition told investigators she had been dead for months, possibly since late 1967. Cold winter months had slowed decay, but the forest had done its work. Identifying her would be nearly impossible. The canvas was the only physical clue. A cheap tent covering, something anyone could buy at a roadside shop. Nothing unique. Nothing to point to a suspect. As investigators lifted her into the body bag, the scene grew eerily silent. Even the officers, hardened by years on the job, felt something about this case was different. Something colder. Something crueler. One of the sheriff's deputies stood over the bundle and said in a low voice that only a few people heard. "Until we know her name, she'll be the tent girl. A nickname. A placeholder. A simple phrase that would follow her for the next 3 decades." Little did they know that the mystery they had just walked into would become one of the most enduring cold cases in American history, a case that would outlive detectives, outlast conventional investigation, and eventually be solved not by police, but by a young man with an internet connection 3 decades later. For now, though, all they had was a body. A canvas. And a question that haunted everyone who saw her that day. Who was she? And why did no one come looking for her? The body found in the green canvas tarp was taken to the Fayette County Coroner's Office, where forensic experts began the painful task of examining what little remained. But from the very moment they started, investigators realized they were facing a nightmare. Her body was already in an advanced stage of decomposition. The cold Kentucky winter had preserved some features, but time had erased many of the details that could have identified her. The young woman had been dead for months, possibly more. She had no wallet. No personal belongings. No jewelry. No fingerprints that could be matched. She had nothing. Nothing that could tell detectives who she was. Or where she came from. Or why she ended up inside a discarded tent cover. Back in 1968, forensic science was limited. There were no DNA databases, no computerized missing persons systems, no national cross-state coordination. Every clue had to be connected manually. Every lead had to be chased down by hand. Every possibility required weeks, sometimes months, of waiting. And worse, the police hit a wall almost immediately. There were no reports of a missing girl in the surrounding counties that matched her description. No parents calling in panic. No sisters searching. No boyfriend reporting her disappearance. It was as if nobody was looking for her. As if she had simply vanished from the world without leaving a single trace behind. Because of this, the case grew cold astonishingly fast. Detectives put out flyers, sketches, and newspaper notices. They placed her description in police bulletins across the Midwest and South. They even contacted military bases, hospitals, and traveling circuses. But each time the phone rang, each time someone thought they recognized her, investigators followed the lead only to hit another dead end. Weeks turned into months. Months turned into years. Years turned into decades. And during that time, the name, Tent Girl, became a symbol, an unsettling reminder of a young woman whose identity had been stolen from her by both violence and time. Her nickname became so well known that it eventually replaced her real name, the one nobody knew. In newspapers, documentaries, and community discussions, she was always the Tent Girl. She was buried in a cemetery in Georgetown, Kentucky, under a simple gravestone. The stone held only a few heartbreaking words. Tent Girl. Found May 1968. Died about 1967. Aged about 16 to 19. Unknown. This single word, unknown, haunted the community. Visitors came to leave flowers. Others prayed by her grave, imagining what kind of life she lived, who she loved, and who she might have been before she became a mystery. Detectives who investigated the case retired. Some passed away. Entire generations grew up hearing the story of the unidentified girl found wrapped in a green canvas. Elders told their children, and those children grew up and told theirs. The Tent Girl became an unsolved legend, an open wound in the quiet Kentucky woods. Despite countless attempts, every lead dried up. Every potential identification fell apart. Every new investigator inherited the same hopeless file, thick with notes but thin on answers. The world changed, technology advanced, families moved, and memories faded. Yet her story refused to disappear. Something about this young woman, about the cruelty she suffered and the mystery surrounding her death, held on tightly to the hearts of people who heard the story. The case remained cold, frozen in time. Until one day, Decades later, the tent girl's story would fall into the hands of someone who couldn't let it go. Someone who wasn't a detective. Someone who wasn't in law enforcement. Just a young man with an internet connection. And an obsession that would change everything. As the years passed and the tent girl case drifted deeper into cold case obscurity, investigators kept returning to the same painful question. How could a young woman vanish? Be murdered? Be dumped on the side of a highway? And yet no one report her missing? The answer to that question would remain buried for decades. But once uncovered, it revealed a truth darker and more heartbreaking than anyone expected. To understand why no one came forward, we must travel back to 1967, 1 year before her body was found. A young woman named Barbara Ann Hackman, born in Illinois, was living a life that looked normal from the outside, married, mother of a little girl, part of a family that traveled from town to town. But inside her home, life was anything but normal. Barbara had married a man named George Taylor, a carnival worker with a reputation for wandering, secrecy, and bursts of temper. They lived a transient lifestyle, moving across states, joining fairs and carnivals, picking up temporary work wherever they could. Their lives were unstable, constantly shifting, rarely rooted in one place long enough for neighbors or relatives to know who they truly were. People like Barbara. Women trapped in volatile marriages, far from their families, cut off from stable communities. Often disappeared without anyone realizing it. Sometime in late 1967, Barbara vanished. No goodbye. No explanation. No closure. Her husband simply told people that she had run off. That she had left him. That she didn't want the marriage anymore. Some versions of his story included claims that she went to visit family. Other times, he said she had abandoned her daughter. And because their lifestyle kept them constantly on the move, nobody questioned it. There were no neighbors to check on her. No stable workplace to notice her absence. No close friends to ask, "Where is Barbara?" Her family back in Illinois hadn't seen her in years. They knew letters from her were rare because she lived a nomadic life. When the letters stopped, they simply assumed she was still traveling with her husband. Nobody knew she was gone. Nobody suspected she was dead. Nobody imagined she was lying alone in a wooded area, wrapped in a tent canvas. Her husband didn't file a missing person report. Her family didn't file one because they didn't even know she was missing. And so Barbara Ann Hackman slipped into silence. Erased not only by her killer, but by circumstances that made her disappearance invisible. This is the tragic reality of many victims in the 1950s and 60s. People who lived on the fringes of society often vanished without a trace, without a report, without a single line of official documentation. Life continued. Families assumed they were alive somewhere. Authorities didn't know they existed. This was the key reason investigators struggled for so long. How do you identify a woman no one is looking for? How do you solve a disappearance that was never reported? The case felt impossible. And for 30 years, it was. But eventually, because her family had never reported her missing, the burden of finding her identity would fall not on police, not on detectives, but on a young man who stumbled across her case in the early days of the internet. A man who saw her not as tent girl, but as someone who deserved her name back. The one person who refused to let her remain forgotten. By the early 1990s, the tent girl case had become a fading memory in police archives. Her file sat on a dusty shelf, thick with handwritten notes, yellowed newspaper clippings, and photographs that had lost their original color. Detectives who once worked the case had retired or passed away. New officers barely knew her story. But one person, someone completely outside law enforcement, would give this case a second life. His name was Todd Matthews. Todd wasn't a detective. He wasn't a forensic specialist. He wasn't a cop. He was a young man from Tennessee, quiet, curious, persistent. The type of person who notices things others overlook. But what connected Todd to the tent girl case was something more intimate, something that felt almost like fate. Todd had married into the family of Wilbur Riddle, the man who discovered the body back in 1968. For years, he listened to Wilbur talk about that haunting morning along US Route 25. The way the canvas looked. The smell. The silence. The unanswered questions. And the one detail that stuck with Todd more than anything. They never found out who she was. That sentence burned in his mind. It was impossible for him to let go. How could someone once alive, once loved, remain nameless for decades? How could a girl die so violently and be forgotten so completely? Todd became obsessed. Not in a reckless, haphazard way, but in a determined, deeply emotional pursuit of truth. Then came the moment that changed everything. The year was 1995. The internet, still in its early, chaotic Wild West phase, was slowly becoming a place where people could share information instantly. There were online bulletin boards, message boards, and primitive search engines. Todd realized something that police never could have imagined in the 1960s. The internet could connect unidentified bodies with missing persons in a way no detective ever had the tools to do. Late at night, while the world slept, Todd sat in front of a glowing computer screen, scrolling, searching, reading every missing persons report he could find. He combed through early databases, digital archives, and online forums where families posted about loved ones who vanished decades earlier. He did this for years. Every night, after work. Every weekend. Every spare minute. He compared descriptions. Cross-referenced dates. Checked physical details. Looked at every clue, no matter how small. But the 10th girl's identity remained a mystery. Until one night, something changed. Todd came across a missing persons listing posted by a woman searching for her sister, who disappeared in 1967. The description was eerily close to the 10th girl's. The age matched. The time frame matched. Even the general location made sense. The missing woman's name was Barbara Ann Hackman. Something inside Todd shifted. He felt it. A spark. A connection. For the first time in nearly 30 years, someone had found a lead that made sense. Todd tracked down Barbara's siblings and spoke with her surviving family members. Their voices trembled as they told him about Barbara, how she had married young, how her life had been difficult, how she disappeared without explanation, and how they never stopped wondering where she went. Todd knew he had to be careful. Hope is powerful, but dangerous. He needed proof, absolute, undeniable proof. And now, for the first time in history, he had a tool investigators in 1968 didn't. He contacted authorities and pushed to have Barbara's family DNA compared to that of the 10th girl. It wasn't easy. It took persuasion, paperwork, and months of waiting. But finally, the tests were performed. The moment the results came back, the 30-year mystery shattered. The DNA confirmed it. The 10th girl was Barbara Ann Hackman Taylor. The girl in the canvas tarp finally had her name back. And it wasn't a detective. Or a coroner. Or a police task force that solved it. It was a young man with a computer, an internet connection, and an obsession he refused to abandon. A man who believed that even after 30 years of silence, a forgotten girl deserved to be heard. For nearly 3 decades, the young woman found wrapped in a green canvas had been known only as 10th Girl. Her real name, her real life, her real story, had all been stolen by the darkness of her final moments. But now, in the late 1990s, something extraordinary was happening. A tool that didn't exist in 1968, something more precise than any fingerprint match, more revealing than any eyewitness testimony, was finally within reach. And for the first time since her death, science was about to speak for 10th Girl. After Todd Matthews found a potential match, a missing young woman named Barbara Ann Hackman, he contacted the authorities in Kentucky. His voice trembled as he explained what he believed. Here was a woman who vanished in 1967. Here was a body found in 1968. Here was a family who had searched for decades but never knew where to look. And here was a cold case that had been frozen in time for too long. Detectives were skeptical at first. After all, hundreds of supposed matches had failed over the years. Thousands of people had claimed Tent Girl looked like someone they knew. But Todd's lead was different. Her description matched. Her age matched. Her disappearance aligned perfectly with the timeline. Still, law enforcement needed something undeniable. Something that could withstand scrutiny, time, and doubt. They needed DNA. When Todd contacted Barbara's sisters, they were shocked. They had never even heard of the Tent Girl case. They had no idea a body had been found the year she vanished. They had spent most of their lives wondering silently, fearing the worst, imagining every possibility except the truth. Now, decades later, someone was telling them that they might finally get answers. The sisters sent DNA samples, hands shaking, hearts pounding, terrified of what the results would confirm, but desperate to know after so many years. Is this really Barbara? In 1998, advanced DNA technology was still new territory. It took time, weeks of careful analysis. Samples from Barbara's living relatives were compared to genetic material from the Tent Girl's remains. Todd Matthews waited anxiously, checking the phone constantly, knowing this test could either be the end of his long pursuit, or another heartbreaking dead end. Then, finally, the call came. The DNA was a perfect match. The Tent Girl was Barbara Ann Hackman Taylor. The girl who disappeared without a trace. The young mother whose life was stolen. The woman buried under a gravestone marked unknown. She finally had her name again. When the news was delivered to Barbara's family, the emotions were overwhelming. Tears of grief. Tears of relief. Tears for a sister, a daughter, a mother who never deserved such a lonely fate. After 30 years, they finally knew. She hadn't abandoned her family. She hadn't run away. She didn't choose to disappear. She was murdered. This truth, painful, heavy, but finally real, allowed her family to reclaim her memory. To honor her life. To restore her identity. A new gravestone was placed on her burial site, this time etched with her full name. Barbara Ann Hackman Taylor. Mother, sister, daughter. 1967. A name carved in stone. A permanent reminder that she was more than a mystery, more than a cold case, more than a nickname that haunted Kentucky for decades. She was human. She was loved. She is remembered. And all of it, every answer, every discovery, every moment of closure, was possible because one young man refused to let her story remain unfinished. In the aftermath of the Tent Girl's identification, something extraordinary happened, something far bigger than one cold case. The story didn't just end with a name. It evolved into a turning point in forensic science and a powerful reminder of how one person's determination can change the world of criminal investigation forever. For more than 3 decades, the Tent Girl was a mystery frozen in time, an unidentified young woman buried under a tent cloth, forgotten by almost everyone except law enforcement and one curious teenager. But when her identity was finally revealed as Barbara Ann Hackman Taylor, what followed was nothing short of a revolution in how we approach missing persons and unidentified victims. This case became a symbol, a blueprint, showing how modern technology, online communities, and the persistence of ordinary people can accomplish what investigators alone sometimes cannot. After her identification was announced in 1998, the Tent Girl case drew global attention. People were stunned. A case unsolved for 30 years was cracked not by a detective with unlimited resources, but by Todd Matthews, a man who simply refused to give up. Matthews' dedication sparked conversations across the United States about how many Jane Does and John Does were still out there, buried without a name, without closure, without justice. This single case triggered a national awakening. Matthews used this momentum to push for something revolutionary, a centralized online database that connected unidentified remains with missing persons reports, something that did not exist at the time. His efforts, combined with growing public attention, helped lay the foundation for what would later become NAMUS, the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. Today, NAMUS is one of the most important forensic tools in America, used by police departments, coroners, investigators, and families searching for missing loved ones nationwide. The Tent Girl case also reshaped the way people thought about involvement from the general public. It showed that you don't need a badge to help uncover truth. Regular citizens with internet access, curiosity, and compassion can make meaningful contributions to solving mysteries that have remained stagnant for decades. It was a landmark moment that blurred the line between professional investigations and public collaboration. Even more profound was the emotional legacy. The case brought closure to Barbara and Taylor's family, who spent years wondering what happened to her. Her daughter, who never had the chance to truly know her mother, finally received answers that she thought she would never get. The discovery gave her a sense of peace she'd lived without for her entire life. Law enforcement agencies also learned an invaluable lesson: never underestimate the power of preserving old evidence. The critical details in the Tent Girl case, sketches, notes, skeletal records, and that simple tent cloth, became vital pieces of a puzzle solved decades later using new techniques. It taught investigators everywhere that every detail matters, because one day, technology will evolve. And when it does, forgotten evidence can suddenly speak again. Today, the Tent Girl is no longer just a nickname carved into a tombstone. She's a reminder of the thousands of unidentified victims still waiting for justice. Her case continues to inspire cold case detectives, forensic scientists, genetic genealogists, and volunteers across the world. It symbolizes hope, not just for solving old cases, but for honoring the lives of those who were lost and forgotten. In the end, the legacy of the Tent Girl stretches far beyond the woods of Georgetown, Kentucky. Her story reshaped how America handles unidentified remains. It sparked new innovations in forensic databases. It united families with answers. And most importantly, it proved that even after decades of silence, truth can still rise to the surface, if someone is willing to look for it. This is the lasting legacy of the Tent Girl, a story of persistence, identity, justice, and the powerful message that no one, no matter how forgotten, is ever truly beyond being found.